Hey everybody, it's Eric live. Oh, I'm sorry, not live. Alongside Rod here, not live, with our Maryland pregame show presented by Fanduel Sportsbook, your go-to source for betting on the sports you love to watch, whether it's a parlay or you just want to stick to the money line. You'll find all the odds you need on the Fanduel app, easy to download, and you can get started right away. Spartans are certainly a lot happier than they were last year returning for the West Coast, as they're now a perfect 2-0 coming back. Maybe the only player who's not so happy is Kur Teng, who felt the wrath of AI after Coach Izzo was caught on camera saying that Kur couldn't even guard his mother. Even Steve Izzo got into show had a picture, I guess, of Teng with his grandma, with a note alongside saying that there's the update from Appleton, where his grandma lives. Teng 11, grandma 4. So anyway, memes aside, Michigan State is sitting in a three-way tie for third, 1 game back from Nebraska and a half game back from Illinois at 17-2 and 6-1 in the league. Definitely sitting in a good position to head into the Michigan game in East Lansing at 9-1, especially with how bad this Maryland team is. And how bad are they, you ask? They're an 18-point underdog per Bartovic. I don't know what it is in KenPom. I'm sure it's similar. And miraculously, they're no longer considered a quad 4 game, which they were just a couple days ago. So I guess they've got that going for them. And, their coach is, you might recall, by Buzz Williams, is in his first year. He's got a really good record overall. He's a 615 winning record. And about every 6 years, he changes places. He was in Marquette for 6 years, won 60% of his games. Virginia Tech, he won about 60%. Texas A&M, he's there for 6 years, won 62%. 17 seasons, he's been to the NCAA tournament 11 of those years, made a Sweet 16 about 3 times, made an Elite 8. So this all comes, of course, on the tail of Kevin Willard, who left in really strange circumstances. He clearly had some sort of falling out with the administration at Maryland before they ended last year. They had a great run through the Big Ten and then also through the NCAA tournament. They won quite a few games with the Crab 5, right? The really good starting 5.
Sweet 16, yeah.
Sweet 16, yeah. So a really good season. Not a whole lot. Even when they were playing well last year, I feel like there was not a huge a real big buy-in from the fan base. It wasn't what it was, or I feel like what it was when Maryland first joined the league, like as far as the sort of the intensity of the fan base and stuff when you go watch the games. And so now
let's talk about that a little bit before we go into this season, because I think it's an interesting topic. When Maryland joined the Big Ten, they were what I described not so much as a sleeping giant, because they had been winning a lot. I mean, they won a national championship in the aughts, right? With Gary Williams. But it felt like it was a program with great tradition that had been solid under Mark Turgeon, but had not reached the heights that they had been at under Gary Williams or even Lefty Driesell before that. And it felt like there was even more potentially there for that program, because they had great fan support, great tradition, and they sit right in the middle of one of the best basketball recruiting territories in the country, the so-called DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia.
Mm-hmm, right.
And so all that added up to what I thought would be a great basketball addition to the league. And for much of Mark Turgeon's time there, they were varying degrees of solid, and a couple years were really good. You remember that first year they were in the league, Melo Trimble was a freshman on that team. And they didn't win the league, but I think they finished second or third. They were extremely competitive, really good. Then a few years later, the COVID year, where they didn't get to play in the NCAA tournament, but they tied for the Big Ten title. Right. And so, and throughout that whole time, while there was always fan heat on Turgeon, because the feeling was he wasn't doing the things I had suggested were there potentially for them, making them a great program instead of a good one. The very fact that there was pressure on him, I think, was an indication as to what Maryland is or was and could be, right?
Yeah.
They don't,
But they
you don't
enough.
feel pressure if nobody cares.
Exactly. Yeah.
But then Turgeon, we got through the COVID stuff, and Turgeon's last couple of years were not good. In fact, the last one, he barely started. He bailed out in December, if I remember correctly, and Danny Manning finished the year out for him. And I think that was the first point that you really started to see maybe some chinks in the armor, because I think Maryland as a basketball school figured, because the fans at least figured, because of who they are and all the advantages I talked about, they would be able to get a great coach.
Yep.
Meaning a name coach, steal somebody from a fellow high major. They did, kind of. They got Kevin Willard from Seton Hall. Kevin Willard had been okay, been solid at Seton Hall, hadn't been great, hadn't knocked anybody's socks off. And he's not a particularly dynamic personality. So I really wondered about that. I thought, boy, they really got taught a lesson in the modern realities of the game, that it's hard unless a coach has their own reasons for leaving where they're at. They don't get along with the AD or with the president. They feel, ironically, with Kevin Willard, we're talking about, they feel that the financial support is not sufficient, et cetera. Unless you got that kind of dynamic, I think it's really tough to get a high major coach to move, because all these high major programs, particularly in the Big Ten and the SEC, they've all got money. So the idea that Maryland's going to go buy, say, Ole Miss's head coach, just on that basis, that they're going to outspend because they care more about basketball, not really the current reality. Okay. So they end up with Kevin Willard. His first 2 years, and nondescript. And it feels like, to me as an outsider, it felt like enthusiasm was really starting to wane. You were seeing empty seats in that building, and it just wasn't the same kind of environment it had been for years and years and years. And then you get to last year, where they finally do have a good team. And where they finished tied for second, I think, in the conference with Michigan. I believe that's where they ended up.
Mm-hmm.
But it was only maybe at the tail end of the year. Like the Michigan State game was a great environment. The one MSU won on He Who Shall Not Be Named's half-court shot. That was a great environment, but that hadn't been going on all year. That was at the tail end when people finally got, I guess these guys are good. And they started showing up. But then Willard I think it was at the Big Ten tournament, or maybe it was between that and the NCAA tournament. I can't remember.
I think it was a Big Ten tournament, because they were doing some media, and he mentioned the New York trip, I think, is what.
Yes, he started going on about the lack of financial support. What you're talking about is when they went to New York, and it was a non-conference thing. He wanted to stay an extra day just so the team could have the experience of being in New York. And a lot of his players had never been there, et cetera. And he was told by the university, can't afford it. It's not in the budget. Got to come home. And that was emblematic of a general complaint he had, that financially, the upshot of it is financially, they were not going to be able to compete. That was what he was saying, which was interesting, because again, Maryland is I think most people have thought of as a basketball school, meaning the school cares about the sport. They've supported it generally, but the NIL era is a different beast. And he did indeed leave for Villanova. Now, in my mind, that should never happen. A Big Ten school should never lose a coach to any other conference. And when it happens, you've really got to wonder what's going on at that school, because there's so much money flying around Big Ten athletic departments these days. But it happened. And so I thought, boy, this is not good, because they lost a guy basically who was saying, you don't have the money to compete at the levels you need to compete.
Right.
And then they get Buzz Williams. And Buzz Williams, now you rolled through the resume. He's been a lot of places. This is his fourth high major job.
Yeah.
And he's never been fired. He's always
left.
Which is
weird. Which is all weird.
Because he's been successful. I believe this is true. I'd have to look it up to confirm, but I believe at every one of those stops his last year, they were an NCAA tournament team. So he's not, I wouldn't describe Buzz Williams as an elite coach, but he'd be in the very good category. He's won big at 3 different places in 3 different leagues, the Big East, then the ACC, then the SEC, and now he moves on to the 4th, the Big Ten. And he won't get a chance to coach in the Pac-12 since that's gone. So he's hit for the cycle. But it was remarkable to me that I'm shocked they were able to get a guy with that kind of pedigree. I figured they'd probably have to go mid-major, guy who won big at the mid-major level and was looking for a step up.
Right.
Not the case. And I'm not sure what went on at Texas A&M, why he felt compelled to leave, but leave he did. And so I felt like, boy, they really recovered pretty nicely. Not that I think Buzz Williams is in the upper tier of coaches in the Big Ten, but he's, like we're saying, he's won. That's a reasonable response to a very unreasonable situation in terms of the way they lost Willard. And he went out and it looked on the surface like he did a pretty good job in the portal. He even landed a couple of high school recruits. He brought some guys over with him from A&M. I can't remember where I picked them. I don't know if you looked it up, but it wasn't the basement. I can tell you that. I figured that they would be
you had him 11th.
I had him 11th. Okay. Yep. So that's
between Indiana and Iowa is basically where you had him.
I had Iowa 10th and Indiana 12th.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's about what, I figured bubble type team. And if you're the 11th best team in the Big Ten these days, that's probably about what you are depending on the year. So that's where I expected them to be. They are horrendous. They are, in my view, now it doesn't say this in the standings. And if you look at Penn State tonight, as we're recording this, they're wrapping up or just wrapped up being blown off the floor by Wisconsin. But Penn State has played better in Big Ten play than Maryland has. Maryland happened to beat them in the head-to-head. But Penn State has been a better team more often than Maryland has. I mean, to illustrate how bad it is, their best win this year is over number 112 in Ken Palm Marquette. They haven't beaten a team inside the top 100, in other words. All but one of the losses they've taken have come by double digits, and the one that didn't was by 8 points. They've lost games by 39 and 33 this season. I mean, you can go on and on and on, and we're going to in some level of forensic detail as to how bad they are, but it is shocking. Now, look, they've had a significant injury. I mentioned he brought some guys from A&M over with him. The best of them was Pharrell Payne, which people may remember from Minnesota. He transferred to Texas A&M, was really good for Texas A&M last year, and frankly, was playing very well for Maryland this year. And he got hurt, I believe, against Michigan back in early December. And it looks like he's done for the season. I had read some speculation a couple days ago from a Maryland site that said that they wondered, because he is walking around, he doesn't have like a boot or a brace or anything like that on it,
right?
That they felt like, well, they're setting up an appeal for an extra year. And my thought is, why would you bother with that? Just have him sue. It's over. He'll get the year.
Yeah.
But
right.
You're paying attention to NCAA injury rules now? I mean, come on. But anyway, it doesn't look like he's going to play again this year. And that was a major blow, because he was their leading scorer, their leading rebounder, their leading shot blocker, all that, was playing well. And he gave them a presence that they just do not have anymore. So that was a loss. But look, they were getting blown out while he was playing.
I was going to say he was there and they were still bad.
It's not right. It's not as if, they were a totally different team when Pharrell Payne was on the floor. No, they were still really bad. Yeah. It was just they were a little better and had one better player. But it's just everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. That's the bottom line. And this is, in my estimation, again, not right now reflected in the standings, but in my estimation, based on what I'm seeing, this is the worst team in the Big Ten.
Yeah, no, I agree. I saw him. I watched a little bit of that Illinois game until I just got bored, and they are terrible. And Farrell Payne, the interesting thing about that is he had that horrific injury that where he just basically did the splits kind of, and then he bounced back from that a couple game, maybe 1 or 2 games back. He was fine, and then got really hurt against Michigan. So I wanted to step back just for a moment and talk about Maryland briefly. And this is more like this is one, there's no data, there's no way to prove this sort of thing. But I feel like, when Maryland joined the Big Ten, that was what, that was 2006 or something like that. 5.
No. Much more recent.
More recent, like
2014.
2014. Okay. So that moves the league out from 12 to 14 teams, or 11 to 14 teams, right? Because I think it
went from 12 because it was Nebraska got added to make it 12, and then
make it 12.
Maryland and Rutgers were the next 2.
So then the Big Ten became some of a super conference, not as big as it is now for sure. I mean, as now conferences are just getting, massive. So you take Maryland, which was a good basketball school, had all kinds of built-in rivalries with the teams in the ACC. You throw them in the Big Ten. There's no natural rival. I mean, there's Rutgers, but they're terrible and no one cares about them. Penn State's not really good at anything either as far as basketball goes. Maryland certainly hasn't gotten better at football, but just focusing on basketball, they sort of lost their natural rivals. And, we talked to Jay Billis. I think he sort of poo-pooed the whole idea that these rivalries, and he's right to some extent. You take North Carolina out of the ACC, and for 10 years, is it going to, they're going to be able to develop a rivalry like they have with Duke? Probably not. But anyway, so you maybe can develop new rivalries, but I guess the point is that you sort of lost what you had as far as the basketball sort of, then some misfortune hits a little bit, or at least, some unexcitement, COVID hits, which is crazy and affects things as well. And I think you have a small window of a broader thing about college athletics. Yes, you can look at right now and say, well, the transfer portal, all this crazy stuff's going on, players coming in, moving around all the time, unlimited free agency. People are still watching. People are still engaged. And that's absolutely true. But you got to wonder on at the subsurface, under the surface here, that you could potentially be really damaging the game. When you make these changes, there are consequences potentially. And I wonder if Maryland is an example of a place with a great culture, great basketball thing, and it kind of looks like it's gone. I mean, maybe it'll come back, but you know what I'm saying? It just feels like there might be something that you kind of push things around a little too much, and it might be okay for a little while, and then it's suddenly just not okay. And then to get back to what you had might not be able to. And I think that's a risk for the game. Obviously, when you totally disconnect the college from the athletics, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I think you've got at least a couple different points in there that are worth talking about. The first bit is the damage that the move did to them from a basketball perspective. And again, I think most people realize this, but let's keep in mind, basketball does not matter. It is not the motivating factor for these moves.
Right.
It's football.
Right.
It's football and the money that football brings. That's it. So not for a second was the fact that Maryland would no longer regularly play North Carolina and Duke in college basketball a factor for Maryland's administration. I do not believe in them making the decision to leave. I'm sure it was brought up by somebody, but it was, I'm also just as certain that it was quickly dismissed as
whatever.
It's not a sufficient reason to not do what we need to do. Right. So all that's true. I do think this. I do think that if I were, so using myself, someone in their 50s, if I was a Maryland basketball fan, I would not have been happy with that move. It would be like telling us, You're not playing Michigan. You're not playing Indiana. You're not playing Illinois. Just think about, if you're a long-term fan of a basketball program, think about all the memories that go along with that over the years. And all of a sudden, you're like, nope, not playing those guys anymore. You're going to be in Iowa City on a Wednesday night in the middle of January. Enjoy. And that's not, look, the Big Ten and the ACC were for forever the two leading college basketball conferences. I don't think the ACC has that status anymore. But for forever, most of my life, that's how it was. And so it's not that the Big Ten, I think the Big Ten is inferior, hardly. But I think the experience is not the same, because you've taken away, when you talk about what these moves produce in the way of real losses for people, well, that's one of the things. Who you're playing, these rivalries that do matter. College sports is about tradition. It is, in large part. That is part of the attraction. It is part of the reason that there is interest in it. And I've been mostly, during this period of upheaval of the last, I'd say 15 years or so, is when it's really accelerated. I think you could trace it to when Nebraska came to the Big Ten and the SEC started expanding. That's really when this wave that we're in the midst of started to ramp up.
Poaching big teams. Penn State was, of course, independent, so that was not really a poaching of a team.
I've mostly been of the opinion that, a lot of this stuff is stupid, but there are enough smart people involved in this. They're not going to, when push comes to shove, they're not going to do things that kill, the goose that laid the golden egg, right? They're not going to do that. They're going to realize, this isn't the pros. Tradition matters more in this. Rivalries matter more. Feeling a connection, a different kind of connection than you do with professional athletics. It's important that we preserve some of these things. And they're not going to be that stupid. Well, I no longer believe that. I think I'm not nearly yet in the camp saying the whole thing's doomed. But I'll tell you, you look around, and every week that goes by, we thought that the stuff going on at Baylor was a big bombshell. Well, we've, not surprisingly to me, we've upped the ante now with Alabama. We're bringing in a guy who was actually signed NBA contracts. Haven't played an NBA game, but he signed NBA contracts, and he's been out. He played in college, which a kid at Baylor never had. He played 2 years at Alabama. By the way, this kid was a Michigan State recruit, I will note. He was a guy MSU recruited. I think it might have been a different path if he made a different choice.
Probably so.
But anyway, played 2 years there. He's been out of Alabama for 3 seasons. And this is going on. And the great thing is Nate Oates is one of the guys tutting about the Baylor move.
Oh, right.
As I go, yeah, because not only you're going to go further than that. So I bring that up only to illustrate the point that we are in it feels like a vastly accelerating process where you just cannot fathom how much longer the center, such as it is, can hold, given the seemingly daily drip of stories that would have been dismissed as insane 5 years ago. And yet we're here. Sure. So to bring it back around to what you were saying about Maryland, the point I gather that you're making is that Maryland basketball kind of a canary in the coal mine, so to speak?
Yeah.
Where they're an example of what can happen. I think that's probably a point well taken, because Maryland is very clearly now, for a variety of reasons, some of it related to the conference move. Because, to finish my point, I guess, on that, as I was saying a while back, someone my age would have been very bothered by that, because you lost all these rivalries. And yes, you're in the Big Ten, and yes, they've had some good moments since they've been in the league, but I can't imagine it's the same for those people. So you're talking about a process of probably, I'd say, at least another 20 years before you have the critical mass of the Maryland fan base that doesn't think about, boy, I wish we played Duke twice a year anymore, right? That's a long time to have to go to eliminate that, okay?
Yeah.
So you look at that, COVID didn't help, but obviously most other places that were, all the other places that were good basketball schools in the league have recovered. They're all, I don't think there's any difference now at places like obviously Michigan State or Illinois or Purdue, even Indiana, Wisconsin. I mean, they're all fine.
Right.
So it's not that COVID's no longer had an impact. It just happened to be that it maybe delivered another blow when Maryland really couldn't afford it. And then they had, a couple weak teams. Then they make a coaching change with a guy who's not particularly throwing. And I suspect a lot of the fan base was very disappointed that they had to hire Willard, that they couldn't do better than that.
Right.
And then Willard doesn't light it up immediately. And then when he finally does have a good team and they finally do start to get interested again, here we go. He's talking about money and they don't have enough of it. And we're where, we're back even with a hire. Like if they'd hired Buzz Williams when they hired Kevin Willard, I think there would have been a little more enthusiasm for the Maryland fan base.
I think so.
For that move.
Yeah.
But now at this stage, and boy, he's never gone through this where he's gone into a place and it's just gone horrendously. Like this is a shock to me. I didn't think they'd be great, but I thought they'd be very competitive. And, he's a guy who's always, his teams have always had a toughness about them. They tend to be physical. He's had a lot of good rebounding teams. He seemed like a guy whose thing would work in the Big Ten. And so far, it has been an abject disaster. And can they get it back on track? Can they get those fans back in the building? I don't know.
Yeah. I want to make one more point too, and we can move on, is that the other thing about the fact that the Big Ten's now 18 teams, you get these super conferences, and the double play really is gone. I mean, there are a few teams you play twice. Michigan State's fortunate they get to play their rival twice, and they just play random teams twice. This year it's Indiana and Rutgers. And of course the West Coast team just play each other. But I think it's really hard to develop a rivalry. Like things can happen in a game, and then you have something happens and then makes some of the fan base rile up or angry. Then you go to their place or vice versa, and then you kind of have something to just get started, and you can develop these rivalries, and you can have geographical rivalries. I mean, we always say stuff about Ohio, right? I mean, just as just people who live in Michigan, no one says anything about Maryland. I'm sure Maryland has jokes about Virginia and Massachusetts and Delaware and stuff like that.
Right.
But you know what I'm saying? You don't have any geographic reason for rivalries or any sort of reason to have an extra interest in a game, a particular game or a particular team. Now you only play people once a year, usually. It just, the opportunities to sort of make important memories or traditions is really hard. And it feels more like especially like you look at Big Ten football. I mean, you didn't play teams for like every year. Yep. So it's just it really takes away a lot. And it doesn't help, I think, the sport. I recognize the money aspect of it, but anyway, that's probably just another little bit. And that's just a problem with conferences getting really big. They just become just like random, just games you're playing.
I do think though, your overarching point as to the potential fragility of all of this is well taken, because that is an example. We're not talking about Rutgers. We're not talking about Penn State. We are talking about a school that has won a national championship in this century, that has been a traditional place where they cared about the sport, and they've produced a ton of great players. They've had a ton of great teams. It's all there. And they are going through this. And yeah, some of it can be explained by, well, they haven't been winning enough, but not all of it. Yeah. Not all of it, not in my opinion. And I think some of these structural or lack of structural factors are probably playing a role. They're making the losing worse in terms of a connection to a fan base, getting people to care. And I would say if it can happen at Maryland, 99 point whatever percent of schools in college basketball ought to be worried, because if it can happen there, I suspect it can happen to them too. There's maybe a handful of places, and I literally mean like 4 or 5, where you just can't even imagine it happening, because they wouldn't ever let it get to this point. They'd be firing people's asses way sooner. Mark Turgeon would never get as long as he got, even though I don't think he was a bad coach, at a Kentucky or Carolina.
Exactly. What a difference.
But outside of those few, everybody would have the same vulnerabilities, in my opinion, that Maryland does. And if you think that doesn't include Michigan State, I think you're wrong.
Yeah. No, I don't think I especially think of those things with Michigan State, to be honest. So, Maryland, how bad are they? So they're 8-11 overall this season. They're 1-7 in the league. Again, you mentioned their kind of miraculous victory against Penn State. I guess the one thing you'd say is, well, Michigan was one of the worst teams in basketball a couple of years ago, and they turned things around. So certainly in this era, that's possible. But looking at them right now, on offense, they're really bad. They're 134th, which, out of 365 teams, it doesn't seem that bad, but that's really bad for a Big Ten team. Offensive foul rate, they're kind of okay. They 64, so they draw some fouls. They rebound offensively at 110th, so not very good, but not atrocious. But then it gets really bad. They can't shoot threes. They're 237th at shooting threes, which is only looks better because they're 308th with 2-point shots. They turn it over a ton. They're 236. They're 18% turnover rate. If you watch them play, if you're watching their games, you'll know why all these numbers are the way they are.
Yeah, it's just the 2-point shooting again. You lose a guy like Pharrell Payne, that's going to hurt. But
for sure,
what difference could he have possibly made? Maybe they'd be 250th with him if he was great.
Yeah,
but it's just it is as bad an offensive team as I can recall seeing in this league for quite a while.
And that
maybe like the worst. Maybe like the very worst Ben Johnson team at Minnesota, maybe. Mm-hmm. You'd have to go there in recent years.
And unfortunately for Maryland, they have to play defense as well. They're 102nd at defense, which is better, I guess, than 134th, but that's still pretty bad for the Big Ten. They don't do anything really well. They're 297th against threes, and they're 255th against twos. So I don't know. They're terrible there too. I don't know which one they're more terrible.
Well, it's everything is some version of mediocre, meaning in the mid 100s or worse to bad. And then when you can't limit opponents' shooting success any better than they have, it's going to be a lot of long nights.
Yeah, that's a lot of double-digit losses.
So they can't shoot. They can't stop opponents from shooting. Kind of sums it up why they're having problems. And then nothing else mitigates that, really.
Right. The only thing that makes it, I think, a little bit better is they play really slow. They're 220th in average length of overall offensive possession and 171st in overall tempo, so they can minimize the dreadful possessions overall. But that's probably
but that's even more damning, because they're still getting run out of the gym on a
nightly basis. But at least you don't have to watch as many bad possessions.
I mean, how much worse would it be if they were actually playing a moderate pace? I mean, the mind reels.
Oh, so that brings us to an interesting wager. We're talking about. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the Ken Palm line. So again, we always record this.
It's 20. It's 20.
So 20 points. All right. So it's 20 points, and I had 18 Bartovic.
So it's usually it'll be around 19.
19 and a half, probably, or 20 points. That is a lot of points to take on a game. I mean, I know Maryland's really bad, but 20. I say that. Yeah, Michigan State easily covered the last 2 games, both in Washington and Oregon, by a lot. I mean, well, I guess Oregon they covered by, I guess it was 8 points. That's quite a bit. And Washington they covered by 13 points or something like that too. So I don't know. I guess if you're wagering, you're going to have to assume Michigan State's going to win by 25, 30 points, which
it's a lot of points. It's a lot of points. And
I'd be scared.
There's a big difference. Look, Maryland's a bad team, but there's a big difference between that and what was it against Oregon? A 10-point spread?
Yeah.
Like, because Oregon's a bad team too. But that felt like, okay, 10 points. The it's hard. If it does end up 19 and a half, 20, that's a lot. Because what that means is that two things have to happen. Maryland doesn't play out of their minds, which is always possible. Like somebody can come in, even a bad shooting team could just have a hot day in this case, and that might keep it a little closer. Or Michigan State just comes out really flat for 40 minutes. We have not seen that really. I would say the closest to that we've seen in Big Ten play was the game at Penn State. But that was on the road. And it's just, I don't think I would be shocked if this game is close, but that's a lot of points. It also wouldn't shock me if Michigan State wins by 15, in which case you'd lose if you're hammering Michigan State.
Well, let's say you think I'm just going to stay away from this game, but I'm going to wager on the Michigan game where they play Ohio State tomorrow night as we're recording this on Thursday. That's also 20 points.
Is it really?
It is. Yeah.
It's a 20-point spread. Oh, I'd take Ohio State. I mean, without even thinking about it. Very good. I don't think Ohio State's great. Don't get me wrong. But Ohio State can score, and they have multiple guards who could score. And you know what Michigan's not doing a great job of right now? Guarding the perimeter. Michigan, I think they're easily going to win, but 20? Big number. I
take it back. Hard. Now I'm looking at FanDuel. It's 15.5 on FanDuel. My apologies.
Okay. All right. That's a little more reasonable, and that's a tougher call.
Yeah.
Because I could see Michigan winning by 16.
Yeah.
20 is just a lot for anybody.
Yeah.
That's still a big number, though. I don't know. I'd probably still be inclined to go with Ohio State. I think Ohio State, you look at last night, Indiana did not play well at all. They were miserable, or the other night, 2 nights ago, I guess. And they lost by 14, right? So Ohio State is, I think, a team at a similar level to Indiana. So I would probably be inclined to take Ohio State, but it's close. I think Michigan wins. 15 still a lot. And what's Michigan done lately to convince anybody that they're going to just throw on the afterburners and crush someone? They haven't played that way for a month.
They played during portions of that Indiana game. They certainly looked really good, but
I thought Indiana looked really bad. I thought Indiana looked really bad.
I think Indiana is pretty bad, but
there's a difference. Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe you just want to wait until you put some money down in the Nebraska with Michigan game on Tuesday, and so you can jump in on that one. It's so funny. Just these schedules are finally the teams are playing each other, but the top of the league just has not played each other. So I guess I shouldn't say that, because Nebraska has played both Illinois and Michigan State.
That's why to me, that and the fact they're the only unbeaten, those two things. They also beat the hell out of Wisconsin, who's the 6th best team. So
that's true. Yeah.
Nebraska has, I think, pretty clearly, like beyond debate, has the best resume in the league right now. The problem is they just lost their 6th man, and I don't know how long he's going to be out, but it looks like it might be a while. And just at a time when they're going to start playing, I think over the next 2.5 weeks, they play Michigan, Purdue, and Illinois. Michigan and Purdue on the road, Illinois at home. That's bad timing, to say the least. But I'm not sure how long he's supposed to be out. He was wearing a boot in the second half of their game this week, so that didn't look encouraging to me for an instant return.
Boots are never a good sign.
If they can get him back quickly, that'll help. But how quickly? So
anyway. I was just talking to my friend the other day. He's the Illinois fan, and so he's very just upset about Boswell breaking his hand.
Sure.
For good reason. But I'm like, the nice thing is it was a fracture in some respects, because the healing time it's a lot, usually for like a hand, it's more reliable than you get a weird sprain, ligament damage like an ankle or a wrist or something, and you never know what's going to happen, or like a shoulder. So those things just may or may not get better until the season's over. So usually a bone at least the break will fix. One before I go, another FanDuel line here is we've got Indiana Rutgers. That's the other Big Ten game, which I'm sure tons will be tuning in for on Friday night. Indiana has a 7 you have to take, would you take Indiana but you have to give up 7.5 points.
Where is it being played?
It's in Piscataway.
Oof. Probably, because I feel like Indiana's due to have the one thing we know they can do is they have some guys who have the ability to score. Yeah. And it feels like their last couple games they haven't really done very well offensively. I'm also not sure this Rutgers team is built to which is strange because they used to be this way, but they're not now. This Rutgers team, I don't know, is built to just use physicality to take them out of what they want to do.
Right.
And that's the big problem for Indiana. So I guess I'd probably take Indiana. I think they're due. I mean, Tucker DeVries has got to have a good game at some point, right? I mean, you and I have talked about it a few times off the air. I mean, he's just been terrible.
He is
compared to
way below expectations. I think what we were thinking, like, first, second team Big Ten, all Big Ten or something. And he's, I mean, not even within 8th team all Big Ten at this point.
Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, I guess I would take IU. That's a lot of points given that IU hasn't played very well, but IU really needs a win. I mean, they're starting to get to the point that, you lose a game like that, maybe the NCAA tournament doesn't look like such a sure thing anymore.
Yeah. I think it'd be a hard thing. Yeah. The one thing I'd say about Rutgers is, I watched that Rutgers Iowa game, and I don't know if that was an indictment against Iowa, but Rutgers showed some fight in that game. And so they're, they kind of looked a little bit like a tiny bit like the Rutgers of old, but anyway, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. They'll try to play that with physicality. I'm just saying they're not, it used to be that Pikel had some big, I think of guys like Miles Johnson and Omarui. He had some big guys. They don't really have that this year. And it's fine that they'll play hard, but I don't think they have the same they don't have the Michigan State or Michigan physicality that just blew Indiana's offense up.
Right.
That's the problem, I think.
All right. So we were talking before we came on as far as the snowfall and stuff. So I'm not even sure if I have gutters anymore in my house. I've had so much snow, but I'm, where you are, you at least kind of see them, I suppose. And so you want to make sure they're functioning properly. The Brothers Adjusted Gutters will come out and take care of them. I wouldn't know what they'd have to do for mine right now, because just if as cold as it's going to be, there's nothing melting for a little bit. But if you've got gutter work you need done, the Brothers Adjusted Gutters should be your first call, whether it's Kurt or Greg, whether you're on the east or the west side of the state. They'll come out and take care of those things, clean them out, fix the leaks, replace them, whatever needs to be done. They'll get on the ladder so you don't have to. They go out in all weather, except like, in a thunderstorm, and they're out there taking care of stuff. So contact them today. The nice thing is you get 10% off just for mentioning Final Four when you get your estimate. And you can do that at our support page at tffinots.com/support. They sponsor a player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter. And we'll go through the Maryland lineup and we'll see who Rod picks. I'll begin with David Coit. He's a 5'11" senior transfer from Kansas. Began his career in Northern Illinois in the MAC. He is averaging 15.5 points a game, leads the team in scoring, obviously, and shooting too, 42, 39 to 89 for a team that can't seem to shoot. He's a guy who actually can. He also leads the team in assists with about 3 a game. Unfortunately for them, he's averaging a little over 1.5 turnovers a game. So not even a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio.
Yeah, this is a team without a true point guard. Coit is kind of masquerading as one. But what he has done well is score the ball, and especially lately, he's had some very big outings. I'm trying to recall here. Let me look it up. I think it was the Penn State game. He went crazy. Yeah, he had 43 points against
That's pretty
Penn
good.
State. 9 for 15 from 3.
Wow.
So obviously those overall numbers have been boosted a little bit by that performance, right? And he had 15 against Illinois, but 1 for 8 from 3. So you see the difference playing a legitimate defensive opponent, but still, he's one guy they've added that has been pretty much exactly what they could have hoped for. Because he didn't do very much at Kansas last year. He had been a big-time scorer at Northern Illinois the first 2 years of his career, transferred into Kansas last year. If you remember, Kansas had a relatively big portal class that they thought was going to augment guys like Hunter Dickinson and some others to make them a national title contender. And instead, they had maybe the worst year of Bill Self's tenure.
Yeah.
So he didn't really do much there, but he's been very good for Maryland. And boy, I think about how bad they would be if they didn't have him, because he at least gives them one legit Big Ten starter.
Well, then a kind of a strange addition to the team is Darius Adams, 6'4" freshman, averaging 12.3 points a game, shooting 34, 25, and 74, averages 5 free throw attempts a game, negative assist to turnover ratio, so not good. If people may recall, Michigan State was recruiting him pretty heavily. He was I think he was a 4-star or like high 4-star.
I think he was a McDonald's All-American.
Ends up going to Connecticut.
Top 30 guy. Yeah.
Right. Goes to UConn. Then UConn basically recruits over him through the portal, and he gets out of his letter of intent, looks around. I think he talked to Michigan State for a hot minute. I think they were probably not that interested, is the impression I got. And he ended up in Maryland, another obviously big program, Buzz Williams. And it's funny because there were a lot of people who were upset, at least the Spartan Mag board, about Michigan State not going hard after a guy. Cause people see stars and they just like, oh, well, if you want a 5-star or McDonald's All-American, why would you not? Are you crazy not to take this guy? I don't know. I wonder if they would feel that way now.
Well, there's to be fair to those people, and I agree. I thought the overreaction was insane on that one, but to be fair to them, part of it was motivated by the fact that Michigan State had recruited him very hard the summer prior and lost out to UConn. They wanted him and would have taken a commitment at that point. Here's the problem. His senior year at LaLue wasn't very good from what I understand. He struggled. And the Michigan State roster, they were in a position where I think they pretty clearly felt they needed to add someone who could play right away and help out at the point.
Yeah.
Now, we know how things have evolved, and it's not as if Devine has exclusively or even mostly been a point guard, but he has helped out at that position.
For sure, yeah.
And what I heard, and I think there was a difference of opinion within Michigan State staff as to whether Darius Adams was a guy who could help them in the ways they needed help this year. And once the side that felt he wasn't the answer won out, they did not, in the end, go hard after him. Maryland got him. And I think, the scoring numbers are fine, 12.5 points a game, but it's on volume because they got to have somebody play these minutes because their team's awful. And he's been extremely inefficient, and he's not demonstrated that he's any kind of point guard at this stage. Devine's been vastly better in the minutes he's played as a ball handler and a floor leader than Darius Adams has been. So in my view, that has been proven out to be absolutely 100% the right decision for this year. The only argument you could make is, but Darius Adams still has a lot of potential and could develop into a very good player down the line. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but that wasn't the equation at that stage. That was the equation. If he signs in the summer, you'd say the summer prior, you would say, if you're Michigan State, you're planning around that. And so you're also hopefully in a position where you're not stuck with having to play him in roles that you don't think he's ready for. But by the time they got to March and April, they knew They knew what they didn't have, and they didn't think he was a guy who could address it. But I do think he's still got potential for the future. We just have to see how he develops. Got to get a lot better as a shooter, though, because what I had heard about him was that there was good reason to be skeptical that he would ever really be an honest to God guy capable of playing the point at an acceptable level. So if that's the case, he's got to be a more efficient scorer, because that's going to be his future.
Next, we have Isaiah Watts, who's a 6'3" junior transfer from Washington State, averaging 5.1 points a game, shooting 32, 26, and 61. And most of the shots, unfortunately for them, are behind the arc.
Yeah.
Shooting 26%.
It's rough. He does lead the team in steals at 1 per game, but yeah, it's not good.
That pretty much sums it up. Next would be George Turkson, 6'7", 220-pound freshman, averaging about 1.5 points a game, 2.3 rebounds a game, plays only about 13 minutes, shooting 29, 0, and 50.
Yeah, and the 0 is 0 for 5 on the year from 3. One thing I am noticing, and it's not like Buzz Williams had a bang-up incoming class. I mean, Adams was a good get on paper, but the other guys were kind of nondescript recruits by Big Ten standards. And I want to say Turkson maybe followed him from A&M. He was a redshirt freshman. I think that's the case. But okay, I'll give him this. In a year where we're going nowhere fast, he does seem to be investing more minutes as they go along in some freshmen. And Turkson's one of those. Even though he only played 4 minutes against Illinois, he has been playing a little bigger role lately. It's probably the right thing to do.
Yeah, probably so. And then finally at the 5, we have Elijah Saunders, 6'8", 240-pound senior transfer from Virginia. Also played with the Aztecs in San Diego State, averaging a little under 9 points a game, 4.5 rebounds a game, shooting 46, 42, and 79. And most of his shots, or almost a majority of his shots, are from 3, so 42%, not too bad.
Yeah, just under half his shots come from 3. So as a 42% shooter, he's a legitimate stretch weapon for them. The problem is that, he's limited. I mean, 6'8", 240, he's going to be giving up a lot of size to Carson Cooper. And this is what I mean. In fairness to Saunders, I think he probably figured he'd be playing a lot of 4 coming into the season because they had Payne to play the 5. Now he's got to play a lot of 5. And that's a different task.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what Michigan State does with the sort of definitely a smaller lineup. This is very similar to probably like an Indiana lineup. And now, how does that limit someone like McCullough? Does he sort of like odd man out again?
Yes, but one difference here is that with some of these teams that have been able to go small ball, their big men are shooting threats. And other than Saunders, Maryland doesn't present you with that problem.
Right. All right, so let's talk about the reserves. We'll begin with Solomon Washington, 6'7", 220-pound senior. He was with Buzz last year at A&M. He's averaging a little under 10 points a game. Has almost 9.5 rebounds a game, so leading the team. Shooting 40, 20, and 65.
Yeah, he hasn't been starting lately, but it doesn't really matter. He's been consistently playing major minutes, and obviously he's by far their best rebounder. He's the kind of guy that is a Buzz Williams sort of player, maybe a little undersized, but if you remember Buzz Williams, I think the best teams he's ever had were those teams at Marquette that had guys like Jimmy Butler and Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder especially was a power player in like a 6'4" body. So he's had those types of undersized, tough guys before. And Washington is kind of in that mold. He's not a pretty player, not a finesse guy, not much of a shooter, but he can go get you a rebound and compete inside, and he'll play a lot.
Next is Alex Alston, 6'10", 220-pound freshman. He wasn't playing a whole lot, but he played a lot against the last game against Illinois. He played 22 minutes where he had 6 points and 4 rebounds. For the season, he's averaging 2.1 points a game, 2.4 rebounds a game, has been averaging about 10 minutes a game, and shooting 40, 28, and 50 with majority of his shots also coming from 3, despite shooting only 28%.
Right, and that's the thing. So these guys may take shots, they just don't make them. Alston is a guy that kind of a skinny big man, but a finesse big man coming out of high school. He was a player that Michigan State showed some early interest in before they moved on to other targets, and obviously ended up with someone like Cam Ward. But I think it was what I was talking about a few moments ago. The fact that Buzz is playing him in a bigger role lately is probably the right thing to do. It's like, why not invest minutes in somebody who might be able to help you next year and down the line?
Then we have Miles Rice, 6'3" senior transfer from Indiana. Started at Washington State. He's averaging 6.4 points a game, in about 17 minutes, shooting 38, 37, and 93. And I don't know. He was just I think it was at his best when he was in the Pac-12, right? When he was at Washington State.
Yeah. When Indiana got him last year, there was if you remember, they added him and they added a kid from Stanford and that were guards. And they were part of that portal class that supposedly made IU, that led to them having the biggest payroll in the sport. A lot was expected of him because he'd been very good at Washington State. Well, he was not good at Indiana. His role just decreased as the year went along. So he transferred out to Maryland, and he's been more efficient this year. But the fact that he's only playing 17 minutes a game, it's telling.
Yeah,
and
right.
It says to me that he's not giving Buzz what he wants defensively or otherwise, other than shooting, which has been decent. So that's another one. When I looked at this team in the off season, adding guys like Rice and Saunders and Payne, I thought, and Coit, I thought this was a decent class, but it just goes to demonstrate that you can't ever really know what you're going to get when you're putting together an entirely new roster. And Maryland is kind of a worst case scenario for that.
Next is Andre Mills, 6'4" freshman, averaging 8.7 points a game, 3.9 rebounds a game, shooting 39, 32, and 69.
Yeah, again, might as well give minutes to the freshmen and see if you could start to develop some of these guys. Because, if I've got to decide at this point, do I give minutes to Mills or do I give minutes to Miles Rice? I'd probably be inclined to give them to Mills, given where Maryland is.
And finally, sort of emergency rotation guy, Colin Metcalf, 6'9", 220-pound senior transfer from Northeastern, where he's averaging a little over half a point a game, but under 2 rebounds a game, and plays about 7 minutes, shooting 38% from the floor and 57% from the line.
Yeah, I mean, what choice do they have, though? Saunders is your starting 5, and he's not really a 5 size-wise, lengthwise. Then you get to guys like Solomon Washington at 6'7", Turkson at 6'7". You needed someone, so Metcalf is now that guy to give them some backup minutes at the 5. But even with the dearth of size they have, he's not playing a ton.
All right, so for the Brothers Just Gutters, the player needs to be kept in the gutter. Who do you have as the player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter?
Pretty obviously David Coit. I mean,
right, that's what I figured.
And that's the thing. If I'm Maryland, I don't love this matchup because I think he's going to get Jeremy Fears right out of the chute. And we know what Jeremy can do defensively, and especially against a guy who he's actually a little bigger than.
Yeah, doesn't happen often for Jeremy. So yeah,
clearly it's Coit, though. It's Coit.
Yeah, and you've got to be worried too if you're Buzz with Jeremy. If he's guarding Jeremy, which he will at points, and probably the majority of the time, if as possible, risk of foul trouble too with Jeremy.
Yep.
Finding ways to get him in trouble. So
absolutely.
Well, who cleans glass best in Grand Rapids? It's the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They'll come out to your home or your business, high rise, whatever it might be. As long as it's got a window, those guys can take care of it. They also power wash, but we're not talking about power washing this time of year. But they will be out this time of year washing windows, which I find hard to believe. Actually, probably they wouldn't do it when it's like this weekend when it's negative temperature, negative degrees. But they're out there if it's a reasonable temperature, and they'll be out in the ladders, taking care of those windows, the inside and the outside, whatever you need done. Fantastic work. Not just Grand Rapids. So give them a call. You get 15% off as a listener to the show just by mentioning Final Four when you get your estimate. You can do that, of course, at the Final Four is now theschedule.com/support. We can find that. And of course, all other sponsors. Head over there today to have them take care of your windows. We did with our house downstate. It was great. And so our Grand Rapids home, well, now we're just watching snowfall. But anyway, I'd highly recommend the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Who cleans the glass best? I'm up 10-8 right now on Rod with 12 games to go, I think. And I do not get to pick first. You get to pick first this year or this game. I almost said it was me, but that's not it.
Well, I'm counting on a bounce back from Jaxon Kohler. He remains the number one pick, and I'm choosing him.
Well, I'm going to go with Cooper, and I have no reason to not pick Carr. He saved me he saved my bacon last game, so I'm going to go with Carr again, and maybe it'll work out. If it does, if I could go up 3 and steal Jax and then get Jax the next time, I might finish you off here. This is a swing game, maybe.
I'm going to go with Cam Ward because I figure even with an undersized opponent, he's still going to play a lot, and there's some home state motivation in this game for him playing his home state school. So I'm going to go with Cam Ward.
I think it's a good choice. Yeah, I think he'll see it plenty of time unless some gets in foul trouble or something like that. Just because I almost feel like with smaller teams, he's more suited to be out there than say Jesse McCullough off the bench, but we'll see here. All right. So brings, of course, to the 5 keys of the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. When you need Spartan apparel, and they've got a great deal right now on the Dunking Gruff Sparty. So if you want to pick that up, I think it's 20% off right now at Nudge Printing. So nudgeprinting.com. If you want to look at our stuff, like what I'm wearing right now, I've got a full zip. Or if you want a hoodie or t-shirt, head on over to nudgeprinting.com/win. There you can enter the Slido poll, which you can pick who the player of the game is for Michigan State, as well as entering the free drawing for the Tiff Knots hoodie. It costs nothing. And that's at nudgeprinting.com/win. And then also make sure when you're checking out, if you're buying anything, use our special hashtag of just TFFINOTS at checkout for the coupon code. Get you 20% off. Some great stuff. All right. So the first key of the game is, hey, wait, is this the same from last game? Play the game, not the opponent.
Yeah, I said here in the notes, we've had a couple of these lately, and you don't expect to be talking about that very much once you hit conference play, but it's
certainly not with Maryland usually.
It's the reality. It's very easy to look at this team's profile, and then you factor in you're at home and take them lightly. But Michigan State is playing for things much bigger than just winning a game, and that means adhering to program standards. So at a minimum, that means effort level and energy need to be high. I'd also say execution needs to be good as well. You saw Tom Izzo's reaction. He has a 16-point win in a road game, and he's not happy. And I think he was justified.
Yeah.
Because I think for 30 minutes, they didn't play to the program standards at all. And then the last 10 they did, and they ended up winning comfortably. But that was an example of what can happen. And so the same things apply here.
And the second key to the game, Jax. And so Kohler's had, I will say, 3 games just rough. I mean, the Indiana game, apparently he was sick, and then had the 6 turnovers in that game. I think he scored okay, and he rebounded fine. I think it was like 15 and something, like 8.
He didn't shoot
but then yeah, right, hit the 3, and then really had trouble and struggled out west. So he didn't hit any threes, and just was not able to score really hardly at all. And especially the Oregon game, where I think he only took 3 shots.
That's right. So at a minimum, that's got to ramp up. But I'm not worried about Jax. I only say this because I just get annoyed by stupid fan or media narratives that start. I don't want anything to get any kind of life or momentum. So it would be great. And because Michigan State needs him to be the guy we've seen for all of the season, other than the last 2-3 games thus far. So you want to see him get back on track.
He was certainly off to a
I think this is
right?
a team that I think this is a team that I'm sure they'll throw doubles at him and all of that, but at least in terms of physical matchups, they're going to have a hard time stopping him unless they really commit to doubling. And if they do, then he's got to handle that.
Yep. Well, and I was going to say, I think he was off to a blistering pace this year from 3, certainly, over 50%. Got sick, and I kind of just threw him off. He just needs to get back to where he was, which, probably helps coming home, because he's the one guy who actually shoots really well at home. I feel like everyone else kind of struggles, but he seems to be able to knock him down. So the third key to the game is a transition game. Usually that's in here somewhere. Michigan State didn't get a ton done against Oregon. You'd expect them to get a little bit more, and boy, against this Maryland team, it'd be nice to kind of get that rolling.
Yeah, look, I think there's very little doubt that Maryland's going to do everything they can to try to slow the pace down considerably, because in a 94-foot game, they'd get obliterated. There's no doubt about that. So they're going to try to make it slow, much the way Oregon did, But I would say that's often easier said than done. And one bit of difference is Dana Altman as a coach, and even some of Maryland's players, did have experience in playing MSU before. I mean, Dana Altman, not just last year, he saw MSU, was it 2 years prior to that in the
PK 85 or whatever?
Yeah. So Dana Altman's seen Michigan State a couple of times, and some of his players had seen them. Even the transfer, Sean Stewart, had played Michigan State last year.
Right.
Ohio State. So this team, by contrast, I don't believe there's anybody.
Yeah, it'd be Farrell Payne, but he's injured, so it doesn't count.
Because he's not playing. Oh, I'm sorry, Miles Rice, but you're talking about a reserve.
Right.
He's playing 17 minutes a game. Other than that, nobody else on the roster, to my knowledge. I'm sorry, Coit played them last year too. So there's a couple of guys who have seen them once, but nobody on that coaching staff has seen them. And as we know, because it's pretty incredible, Michigan State, again, to my knowledge, has never faced a Buzz Williams coach team. So it's interesting to watch these kind of situations where it's almost totally a blank slate. And as we talk about often, when that's the case, facing the reality of what Michigan State does in transition can be very different than anything you've ever experienced. So we'll see if they're able to get a little bit of a breakthrough. They were able to do okay running against Washington, less so against Oregon, but I think they're going to try. We'll see how successful Maryland is at slowing it down.
Well, we were talking, I think, last episode about just sort of the coaching move, or maybe it's the Oregon preview, just sort of like your thoughts that the amount of the openings, I guess, in the Big Ten are not going to be that much because there's been so much turnover. We're still churning through the turnover from the coaching. So we have one left. I guess it would be Minnesota, be the other coach who's new to face Michigan State for the first time.
Never faced Michigan State, right?
Right. So the fourth key of the game is the boards. As always, Michigan State dominates, lead at both ends. Maryland is not very good on either end, and Michigan State, not really good effort against Oregon. So you kind of like to wash that taste out of your mouth, I think, if you're Michigan State, and just hammer a team.
On the offensive glass, it wasn't good. Defensively, they were fine.
Yeah, they're fine.
On the offensive glass, they weren't at the standards that have been established this year. So against a rebounding team, frankly, that's worse than Oregon, you would hope to see Michigan State get back to business. And they should. They should dominate the glass in this game.
And the fifth and final key to the game is the first half.
Yeah, lately, I mean, they haven't been a disaster, but if you look at a lot of first halves of recent games, Indiana wasn't great, right? And even the beginning part of the second half wasn't great. Oregon, same thing. Washington was okay. But I think you just like to see MSU shake that off. I think the way the games have been unfolding happens for some pretty obvious reasons, which we've talked about. The cumulative effect of MSU's depth and their physicality is the reason why you're seeing them pull away from teams in the last 10 minutes or so.
Right.
But you'd like to have a more comfortable working margin long before we get to that point. So that's what I'm talking about there. I don't think it's necessary to get the win here. I just think it would be nice for this team to maybe start establishing a habit of taking control of games a little bit earlier.
Right. I mean, like a good example of that is the Kentucky game that we witnessed firsthand when we were in New York. They came out of the gates strong and just never, I mean, Kentucky was never in that game. And that's what you like from just sort of like a wire to wire, just kind of domination.
Well, and particularly when you're talking about an outmanned opponent, which
right, exactly.
Oregon was as well. They didn't really do that against it. They let Oregon hang around, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to be again, not because I'm overly worried about losing this game, although anything can happen in the world, but the odds are pretty low that Maryland has any shot here. So it's not about that. It's more about what are you able to get out of this game? For example, we've talked a lot about them being careful, particularly with Jeremy, as to the amount of miles he's racking up at this time of the year, because you want him to be able to answer the bell come late February, early March, and hopefully late March. Anytime you can save him some minutes, you want to do it. Well, one way you can do that is get the game under control early.
Right. Yeah, you'd hope that's the case here. So one quick question. I mean, I guess the obvious thing is who's going to be the best dressed of the coaches, and that's going to certainly be Buzz Williams. He'll come up with he has like a 3-piece suit, and he's got the pocket square and the whole thing.
Yeah.
How long until he loses his sport jacket and is just down to his vest?
Yeah, not
first half.
Long. Yeah, I suspect. Hopefully so.
And I wonder if every guy named Buzz always has a buzz cut. It's just kind of weird. I feel like that's even I've taken care of.
It's kind of hard to go through life with that name without it.
I think so, right?
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of a lot of Buzzes. Buzz Aldrin had one.
Yeah, but astronauts.
I'm trying to think about other Buzzes. I'm coming up.
I've had a couple patients there, and they all do.
Have you?
Most of the ones we meet are kind of. But I would say they're mostly older guys too. They're like, it's not a common.
I don't think it's. Yeah, I don't think there are a lot of 20-year-olds getting nicknamed Buzz. So,
any final thoughts for this game before we, aside from the fact that it's going to be really cold? I think they said that you're not allowed for the Izzo. They're not allowed to line up until 15 minutes before game time. They really don't want those kids hanging out.
Outside pretty brutal stuff. No, it's one of these. In some ways, you'd say it's sort of a thankless task, because if you don't blow them out, there's kind of only downside from the Michigan State perspective of playing a game like this. But I do think, you certainly don't. You'd rather have a game now than a layoff. You want to stay sharp. And I think there are things. We talked about Jax, right? You want to get Jax back on track before this starts to feel like a real slump instead of just an off night or two. You want to see if Carr can maintain what he did. Exactly. Maybe Trey Fort can build on what he did in Oregon and start to maybe find a more consistent role for himself. Can Kur Teng guard anybody's mother? I mean, I think there are a lot of things that you could see being of value to Michigan State in this game, but it's one where the style points are going to need to be there, or else people are going to feel bummed out. And that's a tough spot to be in a Big Ten game. You don't get those very often. How
do you think Kur Teng's going to respond? I mean, I don't think we know enough about him to know.
We haven't seen him.
I think this will be good to find out what he does.
Yeah, he's obviously a quiet kid. I mean, we interviewed him, and that was pretty apparent.
Yeah.
And I think that you see him and you don't see a very boisterous, outgoing guy. But that doesn't mean that, obviously I have to believe he's got a lot of competitive fire. And you would hope. It was funny. I was on Jack Ebling's show earlier this week, and we were talking about that press conference. And I asked Jack, because he's in enough of these things, I asked him who it was. It was a female reporter, and I asked him if he knew who it was who asked the question. And he said it was somebody who's does some writing for The Athletic. He was pretty sure. Yeah. But I said, I was stunned. I said, I figured it had to be somebody that was part of Oregon's media, because the way she asked the question was, she said something like, did you say that to him in an effort to kind of get him to laugh so he could relax? The player's like, what planet are you on?
Yeah.
This guy, and Izzo answered it exactly the way you knew, if you know anything about him, he would answer it, which is, no, that's not a joke. He's trying to motivate him by getting him angry. And I was just floored that somebody in the media could seriously think that might have been what Izzo was trying to do there, instead of the obvious. But yeah, we don't know. We don't have enough data. If we were talking about Jeremy Fears or Jackson or Carson, the guys who've been through it, I think you would say, yeah, I'm pretty sure, because we've seen all those guys just get it handed to them and respond.
Yeah.
And their personality types are such that you'd be pretty confident in that. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. Yeah. I do know this, the way Kur, at least offensively, I don't think he's going to hesitate shooting.
No,
I think he was born confident in his shot. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. I don't know what it's going to mean though overall. And I hope for his sake, and I hope for the team's sake, that he comes out and delivers a response.
Yeah, my impression is, I think Tom's a pretty good judge of how people respond. Although there are times he's probably not sure. He's like, well, I'll find out what kind of guy I got and how I got to work this guy.
I mean, he hasn't, obviously he knows him. So
yeah,
he has a sense in that way, but you can't know. Kur's never been in this situation before, where he was being counted on and he delivered an effort that frankly was not good enough. And yeah. I think that, having watched it, his rotation was terrible on that play that I think I talked about in the post game, that led to an open three. But we just haven't seen it yet, so we'll all find out together. But if I were forced to bet, I would say that I expect him to at least be giving much more obvious effort.
Yeah.
How well he plays, that's another issue.
Yeah.
But I'd be surprised if he's not out there throwing himself around a little bit more.
It is stunning. I was looking, just searching, and there's so many articles on that and how it became a meme, and it was all over the place.
Oh yeah.
USA Today. I mean, it was
a wild
It happened so fast before the game was over. It's crazy.
Yeah, it was a wild night though, because you had that. And I think it was Matt Norlander was talking about the greatness of college basketball on display that night. And this has been said in some ways pejoratively, but it's absolutely true. And it's been true for as long as I've followed the sport. College basketball has always been first and foremost about the coaches.
Yeah.
Because the players are not here that long. They come and go.
Right.
But the coaches, the guys that are real legends are and again, because basketball is a game where you can mic up a huddle and you see it's just, you're closer to it. So you feel like you know these guys much better than even, like a head football coach.
Yeah. I think it's true.
Well, that same night that Tom Izzo had that moment, you had John Calipari go on a long rambling, talked about the state of the game. He talked about motivating his point guard, Darius Acuff. And he said, I hope Darius is mad at me if it's going to mean he plays like that the rest of the way. And then you had Mick Cronin.
Yes.
No, that was the next night. Who was the third one? There was a third one that night, and I'm now drawing a blank on who it was. But then the next night, you had Mick Cronin after the win over Purdue. Just give it to the Big Ten for the scheduling. It's great. I love it. Absolutely love it. I love when these guys are pissed off. I I don't understand fans like, the 18 people who care about Michigan basketball, for example, what has Dusty May ever said that was memorable? Anything?
I mean, I didn't know that was a tradition. I think that's what I remember.
Tom Izzo. Well, that was just a really piss poor attempt to deflect and get his team out of a hole that they created. It wasn't really memorable. Tom Izzo's getting off stuff, every week. Calipari, pretty good interview these days. He's got a lot to say about the state of the game. Dan Hurley, as much as he bothers some people, pretty good interview because he's always pissed off about something. Mick Cronin, I love. People get upset about Mick Cronin. I don't understand it. I think he's fantastic in these press conferences. He's just a man suffering, and he's going to let you know about it. He's not going to mince words. That's what you want. Let's have some entertainment. This is supposed to be fun, right? So well, it was a pretty good couple of days for college basketball coaches, in my opinion.
I always feel like Cronin's is some sort of combination of George Costanza and Archie Bunker. There's like somehow he's sort of both those guys at the same time. He's always
though? I'll say this. Every single thing I've heard him say in these press conferences to get a lot of attention the last 2 years, I'm pretty sure I've agreed with every point he's made. Now, the Big Ten stuff, I get it. His school made the decision to do this.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it. They are absolutely at a fundamental disadvantage that can never be cured. But when he points out, look at what they did. They had us on the road 5 out of our first 7, and then we come home and the first home game is against the preseason favorite in the conference. He's right. The Big Ten office, I refuse to believe the Big Ten office can't do a little more in terms of fairness as best as they can to deal with those schools in terms of how they do this stuff. He's right. That's crazy. They shouldn't have to go through that. Somebody should give a shit, but they don't.
Probably just leave it there. And we'll be here after the game at some point on Saturday. Stay warm. I'm going to try and go out cross country skiing. I may regret this decision tomorrow. We'll see how long I make it or how far I make it. So anyway, until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.